Afternoon, 5:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up 5:30, EJ Antoni, our in-house economist, is with us. We'll talk about the horrible jobs report today in these last few days of the election. He'll give us a closer look at the data, what it means for Americans, and what he makes of all of it. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We're now just 4 days away. Less than that. What's going to happen? Well, my next guest knows all of it. He actually knows the outcome of the election already, but he's not going to tell you. He's going to keep it a secret. Ryan Girdusky is here. He's the author of the National Populist Newsletter and joins us on the phone. Hello, Ryan.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. So I'll let you keep the secret, but if you could just guide us towards what you expect to happen, Ryan, what are you seeing right now?
Well, there's a lot of information out there, both polling-wise and early voting data. So, I'm going to use a mixture of the two. So start in North Carolina and in Georgia. I think the most important data point from those two states is the black turnout, which is down substantially. In Georgia right now, black turnout is about 26.1%. It was an early vote of 2020, 28%. It usually goes down on Election Day, not by much, but a little bit. If Democratic turnout, if the overall vote for the black vote is under 26%, I would not be shocked because black men are not turning out to vote in this election in high numbers. That is true in in Minneapolis. It's true in Philadelphia. It's true in North Carolina. It's true in Georgia. It's probably true everywhere. Maybe they're waiting to vote on Election Day. I don't know. They're not known to be Election Day voters. They're known to be early voters. But the two Souls to the Polls events in North Carolina and Georgia last weekend, remember, there's no early voting on Sunday before the election in either state. That was the worst performing Souls to the Polls since 2004.
Wow.
So very, very, very Democratic voters in those states are 90% Democrat. Sorry, black voters in those states are 90% Democrat. That's a very interesting sign. A lot of people pointing to the gender gap. It's not as severe, even though women lead in the early vote in both states, North Carolina and Georgia. In North Carolina, white women especially, they vote on average 20 points Republican. In Georgia, it's over 30 points Republican. So I'm not too concerned about the gender gap. It could be very well tight, the election, but already rural counties have started voting above 100% of what the election was, of the results in 2020. Some rural counties have done that before. I would guess right now, if Trump got the same percentage that he got in each county and the turnout was different, right? So you use modeling of turnout numbers versus the percentage. This is all just analysis. This is nothing concrete, right?
Right.
Trump would have a lead of about 32,000, 33,000 votes. So that's how much higher the vote has been coming in for Republicans. Hopefully, today is the last day of early voting in the state. Hopefully, Election Day is a big momentum for even late holdouts. I think the congressional district to look at that day is Marjorie Taylor Greene's district in northwest Georgia. It is known to not have great voting turnout history. They vote less than almost every other congressional district in the state, aside from the rural black district way down south. It's the lowest turnout Republican district, though. If she can turn out her voters more than she did in 2020, that will be a very good sign for Trump.
So you're watching Marjorie Taylor Greene's district in particular. If it's up, that's a good thing for Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And so that's Georgia. You talk about North Carolina. What about some of these other swing states? Well, let me save the blue wall states for a moment. What do you make of, say, places like Arizona right now?
So Arizona looks very good. It depends a lot on the independent vote if it breaks heavily against Republicans, which it doesn't have a history of doing that much. They swing, but it's not usually 10 points or above. Right now in North Carolina, Republicans have a very, very healthy lead in that state. They don't typically have leads into early voting. Usually Democrats do.
Right.
There's also more registered voters now, more registered Republicans now than there were in 2020 by a sizable number. So that looks good right now. As of the 29th, so it's 2 days ago, Republicans had 130,000 vote lead over Democrats. That's kind of where you want to be. And it should only pick up as we get closer towards Election Day. I would not be surprised if now it has 100. Look at the right date. It has about 180,000 ballot advantage heading into the weekend. It could be close to 200,000 by Election Day. It would be very difficult for Democrats to catch up. I will say that you'll hear a lot of people talk about low propensity voters and people eating Election Day votes. What this means for your audience is that is this just people who would have voted on Election Day but voting early? 76% of Democrats who voted in all three of the last three elections, right? High propensity voters, 3 of 3. 76% have already voted versus 73% for Republicans. So Democrats have shot off just as much of their early vote as Republicans have, basically, actually a tiny bit more. When you go into the people who have never voted before, these are zeros of threes. These are the people everyone wants to vote to sit there on their both sides. Republicans hold a 33,000 vote advantage among people who have never voted before. 33% of all people registered Republican who have never voted before have voted versus 20% for Democrats. 33,000, that's a good number. The people who voted just one time in the last three elections, Republicans have another 30,000 lead. So between people who voted one time in the last three elections or 0 times in the last three elections, Republicans have about 65,000 more votes than Democrats do. That's a very good thing. People are very bullish on Arizona.
And going into Election Day, that means that Republicans have a bigger pool of voters from which to draw on Election Day as well.
Correct. I mean, they naturally do because there's more registered voters. But even of 3s and 3s, people who are almost certain to vote unless they've died or moved, they would. They have more. They have a lot more to do. Republicans have about 183,000 more voters to cash in from the high propensity. Democrats have about 130,000 more voters. So Republicans have another 55,000 that are almost certainly, unless they have moved or died, going to go vote than Democrats will. So Arizona, unless the independents swing extremely heavily for Trump, looks like it's in decent shape. Nevada is an interesting case because unlike Arizona, Nevada does not have a Republican advantage. They have a Democratic advantage in Nevada. Nevada is they have famously have the Reid machine, Harry Reid's machine that he built for Democrats to win every election. And its home is in Clark County, which is Las Vegas. Las Vegas Democrats hold a very large voter registration advantage, about 90,000 votes. But Republicans have matched them on people who have never voted in an election, right? They have matched that. This is the raw vote, not the percentage, the raw vote. They have matched them in raw vote. They're down about 2,000 people who voted in 1 or 2 of the last 3 elections. And of perfect voters, 3 of 3, they are down 10,000 votes. That's not that much for a very blue county. 35% of all registered Republicans who have never voted before in Clark County, Nevada, have voted in this election. 35% of Republicans. Juxtapose that to just 25% of Democrats who have never voted before. Then you go to the rurals, and Republicans are voting like they are, the third monkey trying to get on the ark while it's raining. The numbers there are astronomical for Republicans. They're building a red wall. And in Washoe County, which is the other urban county in Nevada, as the last time I checked, Republicans hold about 1,000 vote lead, which is not huge, but it's noticeable. It's an important lead out of Washoe County. Right now, Republicans have about 43,000 more votes than Democrats. Democrats typically have about 60 to 80,000 more votes than Republicans in Nevada at this time. The only other election that Democrats have ever gone on to Election Day with a deficit in was in 2014 for the gubernatorial election, where the Republicans won every county and the Republican governor at the time won with a 70% majority. I'm not saying it's going to be that high, but Democrats went from saying in 2020 Republicans have to win independence by X, Y, or Z to Kamala has to win independence by X, Y, or Z. There's a few more days of mail-in votes that may trim the Republican numbers down, but at this point, it's not likely to trim it down by what they need to get it at.
Yeah, and I saw John Ralston has been almost saying this is, as far as I could tell, he seems to be saying, he's the Nevada guy, reporter there that everyone gives credit to as having a good sense of all of this, and not a Trump fan, by the way. He seems to think that Republicans are destined to win this thing.
I mean, he has said not only is Nevada likely to go for the Senate, for the presidency, but the Senate seat's in danger, and all three of the four Democratic House seats, there's four seats, one's a Republican, three Democrats, all three Democrats in the House are at risk at losing their seats too, which is pretty unprecedented for that state. Even the moderate governor who has kept Trump more at arm's length in the past is out campaigning for him right now. So that says a lot.
Okay, let's move on to Michigan and Wisconsin. These are considered, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania are considered the blue wall, the most important states for Kamala to win outright in order to secure the electoral votes that she would need to become president. How are Michigan and Wisconsin faring right now?
Here's the tough time with Michigan and Wisconsin. Wisconsin and Michigan do not register voters by political party, unlike every other state aside from Georgia, which does at least say the race of the person. So you could sit there and kind of say, okay, black voters are guaranteed Democratic voters in 9 out of 10 cases. We don't have a lot of information aside from gender or location in those two counties, in those two states, rather. It makes it very difficult to gauge. All we really have is polling. And by the way, those are two very difficult states to poll because everything is self-identified. You self-identify as a Democrat or self-identify as a Republican. I will say in Michigan, the county recorder for Detroit, for the county of Detroit is in Wayne County, has said she expected to blow past 2020 numbers. I personally find that hard to believe, given that the population has shrunk by nearly 6,000 since 2020. But she's a very smart woman. She knows her city. Maybe she's correct. I don't know. I have heard through the grapevine that Wisconsin is Kamala's best state in the Rust Belt. I don't know. Once again, these are just things I've heard. There's very little data. There's just some polling. Polling has leaned favorably to Kamala in both states, not by much, usually the margin of error, but it has. And so who knows is my answer. I really don't know. It's very difficult to say.
Okay, so then we move to Pennsylvania, which seems to be, out of those three states, President Trump's best chance at breaking through the blue wall. What do you think is happening in Pennsylvania?
So Pennsylvania is, I think, the critical state. I think where goes Pennsylvania goes the country. As of right now, there are about sorry, I have the wrong date. I had to hold up. As of right now, there are almost 2 million of the somewhat 5 million people who will be voting in Pennsylvania have already cast their ballot in. Republicans have done a very good job at keeping up with requests. And they have tightened the margin as far as returning their absentee ballot. Pennsylvania is an unusual state. They don't have real early voting where you can go in person. You have to request a mail-in ballot, and then you can go hand it in person. It's a little strange. It takes more steps. Republicans have tightened it where Democrats just have a 1.5% lead as far as percentages of ballots returned. It will depend a lot on what we see on Monday, which will say what Friday was like, and Tuesday morning, that will show what the weekend was like as far as these returns go.
Yeah.
There is an opportunity for Republicans to return ballots at a higher frequency than Democrats do, which, by the way, in 2020, they were down 8 points. I will say, because I know we're running short on time, that the most important thing I'm seeing out of there is Philadelphia County is down 60% in the raw turnout. It would match the black vote that's going on in Minneapolis, North Carolina, Georgia, if Philadelphia doesn't show up to vote. Republicans are turning out in the rurals in big numbers. I think the whole game is really played in Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania, we talked to Cliff Baloney with Pennsylvania Vote Chase this past week, and he was saying his magic number for in terms of ballots being returned was 33% of all of the early votes. If it's Republicans in these early votes, 33%, then it's going to be a huge Trump win in his view. And right now, as I understand it, it is actually at 33% because he says, back in 2020, Trump had 20% of all the mail-in votes back in 2020. He only lost the state by 80,000. He says if it's 33% of all the mail-in votes to Trump, we're headed for a big Pennsylvania victory. Do you think that's a good way to look at it going into Election Day?
I mean, not to nitpick, but it's 32.4%. What I'm looking at right now, right, as far as the vote for Trump goes, one, Democratic seniors are voting very strong. I don't know how many Democratic seniors in Pennsylvania are now voting Republican. Certainly in the rurals, there is some overlap for sure. What I will sit there and say is this. Democrats have done a better job than Republicans at getting at low propensity voters or medium propensity voters. Right now, Democrats have averaged about, to their credit, about 110,000 more medium and low propensity voters than Republicans. 15% of all, about 15% of all, this is as of the 31st, so it's a little dated because it takes 2 days to set up, or the 30th rather. As of the 30th, 15% of all zero propensity Democrats have voted versus 11% of Republicans. It's not that far off, but it does make a difference. Medium-sized propensity, 17% of Democrats versus 11% of Republicans. But the more important thing is of the threes, of the super high propensity voters, 32% of all Democrats who are almost guaranteed to vote unless they've moved or died have already voted versus 17% of Republicans. There's about 250,000 more of those people, 3 of 3 Republicans, than there are 3 of 3 of Democrats. If low propensity voters get out, if they return their ballot, if they get out on Election Day, if they're waiting for Election Day, like a lot of Republicans are waiting for Election Day, it will make all the difference. If Philadelphia still doesn't show up, like they're not showing up for the early vote, that will make a difference.
Yeah.
I think those are the two things, and that's what we kind of have to go on, other than the fact that all the polls say, hey, it's tied. We don't know.
Sure. All right, finally, Ryan Girdusky, as of this moment, who wins the Electoral College?
I don't know. I think Trump has a great job at the Sun Belt. I think Kamala Harris has a very good chance at winning most of the Rust Belt. I think she's in a pretty strong position in Michigan and Wisconsin. Pennsylvania, it's all going to count on Pennsylvania. So if you know someone who lives in Pennsylvania, if you have anyone in your phone book who lives in Pennsylvania and you're a Republican, you better call them and tell them to go vote.
All right, Ryan Girdusky, thank you as always. Really appreciate your insights into all of that. Thank you, sir. Good to talk to you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Ryan's got the National Populist Newsletter. You can find more right there at his excellent publication. We'll get into the details. It's not reflecting well on Kamala Harris's tenure, I'll say that.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
An invitation from Catholic cemeteries. On November 2nd, All Souls Day, the Catholic cemeteries of the Archdiocese of Washington invite you to remember departed family and friends at morning Mass on the sacred burial grounds. All Souls Day Mass is a spiritual work of mercy for all of those who have died, especially those who have no one to pray for them. Pope Francis reminds all men and women of goodwill that, quote, we live in the expectation of the encounter with God, which is the reason for our prayer of intercession today. Catholic families are invited on Saturday, November 2nd, to All Souls Day Mass at 9 a.m. at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Montgomery County and Resurrection Cemetery in Prince George's County, and at 9:30 a.m. at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Northeast Washington. For more information about this prayerful event at Catholic cemeteries, call 301-871-1300 or visit the website at ccaw.org. That's ccaw.org.
Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 5:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Before we get to the jobs data and our next guest, let me go to Ron, who's calling in from Aldi now. Ron, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Vince. Hey, this is not a General Ron. How are you doing?
Not a General Ron. Yes, of course. Actually, he's a military veteran. Thank you for calling in and your service as always, sir. What's going on with you today?
Well, so on the evening of July the 13th, I placed an order for a MAGA hat. And since I got it the day later, I've been wearing it pretty much everywhere I go and see very few of them anywhere around here or anywhere else that I've been. Although I do have a lot of people that say, hey, I love your hat. And my typical response now is, we need more. Well, Vince, I would like to issue a challenge to the audience out there and say, if you don't have a MAGA hat or a MAGA shirt, call me an optimist, but something tells me you can get one tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And between now and Tuesday, wear it everywhere you go so that the rest of America can see that those that support Donald Trump are not torch-bearing slave-owning white supremacists, but we're great Americans who love our country and want to see nothing but the best happen in it. And the only way that that can happen is by electing Donald Trump next Tuesday.
You know, I while you were talking, I was wondering, so what's the speediest way one would obtain a MAGA hat? And many people like to turn to Amazon Prime. It turns out there's endless options available. You could have this thing one-day delivery. So your ability to get this thing is pretty quick. And if all else fails, you can just drive down to the National Mall. The guys on the side of the road are always selling MAGA hats down there. So you could probably pick one up there if necessary. That's a good idea. So when you walk around, sir, you do get compliments. People come by and they stop you and they say, "Hey, I like your hat."
But the vast majority of people that say anything to me are, yes, I love your hat. I get a couple of sideways looks, but I tactfully ignore them. I wore it in Leesburg over a weekend, one weekend night, and had a couple of people make less than positive comments, but that's been far and away the exception.
Less than positive. I love that. All right. Well, thank you, Ron. Good recommendation. Whatever it takes to get this over the finish line, that could make all the difference. Thank you, Ron.
Well, hey, Vince.
Yeah. Go for it.
So again, I think the important thing, the reason that I wear this hat is because I want people to see that that those that support Trump are common, everyday, great Americans who love their country and nothing more. And because when we watch all the alphabet soup on TV, we're all painted to be terrible people who hate everything.
Right.
And it's simply not true.
And by the way, I'm gonna blow up the way you presented yourself to begin with, but and I know you don't want me to dwell on the subject, but you're a general officer. You retired as a general. And there's a lot being said right now in the media that the generals are against Trump. The generals hate Trump. When you hear that, is that not the most preposterous thing you could possibly imagine?
By and large, yes. Although, quite frankly, when you watch the news, there are a lot of them that don't like him. I mean, look at General Kelly, look at General Milley, look at several others.
Yep.
But there's definitely. I would submit to you that most of the ones that, like me, that love America and love Donald Trump, we tend to keep our political opinions to ourselves on social media and such, simply because we believe that that's the right thing to do. That's what Eisenhower began.
Yes.
Ironically enough, he was a president, but that's still what Eisenhower said back in his time.
Right.
And so I would say that most. I mean, I know there are others that are very vocal in their support, and everybody makes their own decisions. But I would submit to you that most of us that are Trump fans keep to ourselves on social media and simply support him with our daily actions and our daily words in more interpersonal interactions. I've
noticed that is the trend. Ron, thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for calling in. Okay, I want to get to the economic data today. We've got an October jobs report that is ugly. And for more on that, I want to bring in the in-house economist of this program, EJ Antoni is here. EJ, good to have you back on the air, sir.
Vince, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so the Axios headline is October jobs report is uglier than economists expected. What happened?
Well, not only is it uglier from the standpoint of the headline being terrible, the economy added only 12,000 jobs. They were literally all government. The private sector actually lost jobs. But then when we start digging further into the internals, I mean, it just gets uglier and uglier with every single stat that you look at. The economy, for example, continues to lose full-time jobs and only adding part-time jobs. In the last year, we've lost just over 1 million of those full-time jobs, and we've just added part-time ones on net. So again, this is just uglier and uglier the deeper you look at it.
Yes, definitely. So they've revised downward all of these past months too, which seems to be the trend line.
Absolutely. So here's another big problem. I'm so glad you brought this up, Vince, is the fact that if you include not only an anemic growth rate of just 12,000 jobs for the month, but then also the downward revisions from the prior 2 months, it's a negative 100,000 jobs. That's the net change there. So, I mean, from that standpoint, you say, okay, is the labor market actually contracting? Now, that's not quite how the revisions work. The revisions are telling us that we just have fewer than we thought we did. But still, the point is that things are nowhere near as rosy as we're being led to believe. And plenty of people from the White House now are all of a sudden saying, oh, well, this is just due to the hurricanes and it's due to labor strikes. Okay, sure, that may have impacted October, but that doesn't explain why the previous 2 months were revised down. It also doesn't explain why the number of people in the household survey reporting that they were employed dropped by over 300,000 for the month of October. The reason that's significant, Vince, is the fact that if people are temporarily not working because of something like a labor strike, they're still counted as employed in that household survey. And yet that still showed a really big drop. So you can't tell me this is just because of hurricanes and just because of strikes.
So, okay, I want to take people back in time, though, for a moment, because Marco Rubio was totally right about all of this. On October 4th of this year, looking back at the September jobs report, Marco Rubio tweeted the following. He wrote, another fake jobs report out from the Biden-Harris government today. 16 of the last 17 reports have been significantly revised downwards after the media helps them with their fake headlines. But all the fake numbers in the world aren't going to fool people dealing with the Biden-Harris economic disaster every day. And that led to this moment on CNN. This is Brian Stelter, Mr. Potato Head, saying this.
And Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, who on Friday was tweeting about the fake jobs report, sowing doubt about the government statistics. Today, he is imploring his constituents to believe the government forecasts, to take the government information seriously, to believe the government data.
He's talking about the storms. In other words, he's saying, hey, oh, look at him. He's sowing distrust in the economic data. It turns out, based on today's jobs report, EJ, Marco Rubio was once again right. These numbers were revised downward, meaning Marco was right and Stelter was wrong.
Yeah, no surprise on either of those counts, I suppose. And Vince, this is something that we've talked about, I mean, literally for months, actually well over a year now. The fact that a lot of our government statistics, a lot of the data that we rely on, and it's not just listeners of the show, it's also major market movers like the Federal Reserve, brokers. I mean, all kinds of institutions, Congress, for crying out loud.
Yes.
We all rely on this data, and it has been incredibly faulty in a post-pandemic world because so many of the models and so many of the assumptions that we use, or that I should say that we did use in 2019, made sense then, but they don't make sense anymore today, and that's why we're getting these wild errors.
So interest rates are set based on this. Mortgage rates are set based on this. The inflation that's occurring is based on this. The economy is tied up in these lies, and yet they keep being told.
And again, it's amazing how, and this is why a lot of people will say, oh, there's some kind of conspiracy, which I personally don't have evidence of that, but I understand why people would think that. We continue to get overly optimistic initial reports, and those get all the headlines.
Yes.
But then when a month or two later things get revised down, nobody talks about that anymore.
Yep.
Again, that's why it's so important to say, 12,000 jobs were added, but then with the revisions, it's negative 100,000.
So given the pattern, my worry is that I know this is a crappy jobs report we just got, and I'm worried that they're being overly rosy about the numbers right now. Are you worried about that?
Well, absolutely. People are saying, well, once we get better data in, we'll understand that a lot of this impact was just due to the hurricanes and the number will then be revised up. I'm sorry, there's no reason to believe that. Again, going back to not just the survey of businesses, but also the survey of households, which is also showing a big drop in the number of people employed. And we also saw, for example, over 400,000 people just give up looking for work and leave the labor force. I mean, there are a lot of chinks in the armor here. This is not simply a one-off.
Okay, so let's go into some of the other data that you've talked about a lot on this program, and I know that you're concerned about again today. Full-time jobs are not actually doing well at all, as I understand it, and part-time jobs people are just using to keep their head above water? What data do we have on this?
Well, we have a couple of things. One is if we look at the change since June of 2023, so since June of last year, not quite a year and a half, we've seen the economy actually lose on net 1.3 million full-time jobs. So all of the net job gains that we have seen have all been part-time jobs. And if we drill down into sector by sector, what we find is that manufacturing, good-paying, full-time jobs with benefits, we've actually been losing those over the last year. And now professional and business services had such a terrible month in October that now those are negative as well for the last year. So where are we adding jobs? It's all basically one of two categories, either government-funded jobs or low-paying leisure and hospitality jobs. That accounts for most of the job growth that we've seen over the last year. So for the government jobs, you might not just be working for the government. Obviously, the taxpayer is paying your salary then, but you also have a lot of instances where, let's say, a government or let's say a hospital or a school gets a grant and they hire a nurse or a teacher. Well, that is still a taxpayer-funded job. And so that is where we have seen almost all of the job growth recently has been from those types of places. So it's all taxpayer funded. This is important because you need many, many private sector jobs not funded by the taxpayer who can then pay taxes in order to fund all of these government-funded jobs. And again, we just aren't seeing that in the numbers. But again, what we're seeing is people lose their good-paying full-time jobs with benefits, and they're having to get multiple part-time jobs in things like leisure and hospitality to try to make ends meet.
Unbelievable. And that still holds the course. And as you point out, all these government jobs are really, in some sense, being used to pad the data to make it seem like the jobs market's better than it actually is. And the downside of that is all those sugar highs means you're taking in a lot of sugar and then you end up with diabetes, if to stretch that analogy out to no end. Hey, on the other side of this, there's the question of who's getting the jobs. You've been tracking the situation that native-born Americans are in versus foreign-born workers. What are you seeing now?
Well, unfortunately, we just see a continuation of the pattern that we've had over the last 3.5 years, which is an economy essentially where native-born Americans just can't catch up. They still are not back to not only are they not back to their pre-pandemic trend in terms of the growth of employment, they aren't even back to the pre-pandemic level. So if you look over the last 5 years, they've actually lost almost 900,000 jobs on net. So all of the net job growth has gone to foreign-born workers, over 3.7 million jobs there. And just in the last year, again, this trend just continues. In the last year, native-born Americans have lost not quite, but almost 800,000 jobs. So not only are they not growing as fast as they used to, but now they're actually outright losing jobs. So the over 1 million net job growth that we've seen has all been foreign-born workers who are not only millions above their pre-pandemic level, but they're back on their pre-pandemic growth trend. So it's like they never skipped a beat.
Man, oh man. And all this data coming out to us just before the election. EJ, are there any other economic reports destined to be released, or is this the last big one before Election Day?
This is really the last big one. We'll get a couple of smaller ones on Monday, but I don't think we're going to see any kind of impact from that. And actually, Vince, I wonder how much impact are we even going to have from this report, because I don't run into that many people, honestly, who are undecided. Now, granted, I'm an economist and I don't have much of a social life, so I don't run into a lot of people to begin with. But that being said, I still look, at the end of the day, we talk a lot about these big downward revisions, right? And how the data is not as good as it first appears. But I think that's what most people feel to begin with. I don't think the common man needs these reports to tell them whether the economy is good or bad, because they live it out every single day. Their daily experience has been one of, I am worse off now than I was 4 years ago. I can afford less today than I could 4 years ago. I lost my full-time job. I'm working 3 part-time jobs to try to make ends meet, and I'm drowning in credit card debt. That's the experience of a lot of Americans today, regardless of what some official government document says.
That's exactly right. They don't need the government to tell them they're miserable. Thank you very much. EJ Antoni, the in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show, always keeping our eyes open on this subject. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. The media lies are getting so out of control that even mild-mannered Hugh Hewitt has had enough. He up and quit the Washington Post in the middle of a broadcast they were doing today on the internet and from the newspaper itself. He was a columnist there. Take a listen. They were talking election integrity. The lefty guys, his co-panelists, were lying, and Hugh Hewitt was like, I've had enough.
Is it me, or does it seem like this week Donald Trump is laying the groundwork for for contesting the election by complaining that cheating was taking place in Pennsylvania, by suing Bucks County for alleged irregularities. And this is on top of his continual assertion that if he loses, it's because of cheating.
Yeah, that's what he's been laying the groundwork for this, just not in the last week, but in the last
So far, you've heard from Jonathan Capehart and Ruth Marcus.
Months. No election can be fair unless in Donald Trump's mind, unless Donald Trump wins it. And I think we are going to see him both rev up his supporters to contest elections outside of courtrooms and go to every courtroom he can in America where it's relevant to make whatever arguments he can, no matter how far-fetched. We saw
Jonathan, I've got to
last time, but it didn't work out this time.
Hugh.
It may not work. That may not happen this time. And now I'll let you go, Hugh.
Well, I've just got to say, we're news people, even though we're at the opinion section. It's got to be reported. Bucks County was reversed by the court and instructed to open up extra days because they violated the law and told people to go home. So that lawsuit was brought by the Republican National Committee, and it was successful. The Supreme Court ruled that Glenn Youngkin was successful. We are news people, even though we have opinions, and we have to report the whole story if we bring up part of the story. So yes, he's upset about Bucks County, but he was right, and he won in court. That's the story.
I'll let you keep going, Jonathan.
No, I don't appreciate being lectured about reporting when many times you come here saying lots of things that aren't.
I won't come back, Jonathan. I'm done. I'm done. This is the most unfair election ad I have ever been a part of. You guys are working. That's fine. I'm done.
He stands up, he rips his earpiece out, and he storms off the set, and he says when he gets into the newsroom, I quit the Washington Post, too. There's a fight going on in our country. We have an election Tuesday. Please maintain the energy. Have a great weekend. The great one. Mark Levin up next.